Welcome. I'm Donna Lowry, Capitol correspondent for Georgia Public Broadcasting's Lawmakers program. You are watching the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young debate series. This is the general election debate for candidates running for U.S. Senate to fill the seat currently held by Senator David Perdue. In order to ensure everyone's safety, the candidates and panelists are participating from their homes. The Atlanta Press Club gives a special thank you to Georgia Public Broadcasting for helping to organize the online debates. Let's meet the candidates. They are in alphabetical order. Libertarian Shane Hazel is a Marine Corps veteran and co-host and producer of the Rebellion podcast, which analyzes politics from a local to global level. Democrat John Ossoff has served as CEO of Insight TWI, a media production company that investigates corruption, organized crime, and war crimes for international news organizations. Republican David Perdue has served in the U.S. Senate since 2015. Before being elected to the Senate, he sat on the board of 5 major corporations and co-founded Perdue Partners, a global trading company. Now, let's meet our panel. Rahul Bali is a news anchor with Oconee Radio Group. Tom Baxter is a reporter with Saporta Report. And Emma Hurt is a reporter with WABE News. Now let's get started. Candidates will have 60 seconds to answer their questions and 30 seconds to respond to rebuttals. I will hold up a piece of paper letting candidates know when they have 10 seconds remaining. For the full set of rules, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website, atlantapressclub.org. To start the debate, each candidate will be asked 2 questions by the panel. Tom, you get the first question to Shane Hazel.
Mr. Hazel, your party supports very strict limits on the size of government and minimum interference in people's lives. So take us briefly through how a libertarian government would have reacted to the coronavirus and what steps, if any, it would have taken to limit its spread.
Sure, absolutely. First and foremost, we are strict constitutionalists, and by strict constitutionalists, I almost mean anti-federalists. We believe heavily in the 9th Amendment, which secures all rights not enumerated in the Constitution to the people. We also believe in the 10th Amendment, which reserves all powers not delegated to the federal government specifically in the Constitution to the states. One of the things we don't do is we don't call people unnecessary. Everybody in an economy is essential. Every one of us, and like my opponents have said, they have singled out non-essential people. We have an economy that is based on production and service. And the last thing we need to do is have the government step in with a one-size-fits-all answer for everybody and apply that to businesses that people have built with blood, sweat, and tears out of their own equity and their own risk. It's killed more than 1 million jobs here in Georgia, and it's absolutely unconstitutional to begin with. The way we solve problems like this is we allow the states and the people to act in their own interest. We allow people to go out there and exercise their rights to commerce, to trade, to travel, to their right of assembly and protest. We don't lock people up, and we don't point guns at people through force and coercion to get it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hazel.
Very quickly, just a point of admin. We can't see you with the 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. Well, then I will say 10 seconds. Thanks for letting me know. Rahul, please ask a question to Senator Perdue.
Senator Perdue, I wanted to begin with education. During the summer, Governor Brian Kemp and State Superintendent Richard Woods wrote to the Trump administration asking that federal requirements for standardized testing be waived because of, quote, the ongoing challenges posed by and resulting state budget reductions. Last month, U.S. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos responded by saying, quote, you should not anticipate such waivers being granted again. She's referring to it was waived last school year, but not for this school year. First, Senator Perdue, do you agree with the decision of Secretary DeVos? And second, is there a role for Congress in the say of students and school systems having to deal with federal testing requirements, especially when you have school districts like in my listening area, Hancock County, which is still all virtual?
Well, Rahul, that was a great question. But first, let me thank the Atlanta Press Club and GPB and all the viewers for tonight's event. It's a very special time and a very special event in our representative democracy. My mom and dad were school teachers. They believe the best decisions were made by the local parents, school teacher, principals, and administrators. I believe in school choice. A child's education should not be limited to the economic circumstances of their community. But let me just bracket what we're going to hear tonight just a minute. First of all, John Ossoff is desperate. He will say anything to hide his radical socialist agenda. He wants to defund the police. He wants open borders, sanctuary cities. He wants the Green New Deal. He wants to cut and close military bases in Georgia and to force socialized medicine. He will say anything to hide his radical socialist agenda. That's not only dangerous.
10 seconds.
It's dangerous for communities and families in Georgia.
All right. Thank you very much. Emma, please ask a question to John.
I think I get a rebuttal here, do I not?
Yes, you get a rebuttal. And you can raise your hand and let me know that you want it, or do what you just did, which was tell me. Go ahead.
Thank you,
30 seconds.
Senator. Well, we can see you reading from your notes that your staff has prepared you. And the question was about this COVID-19 pandemic, which has killed nearly 220,000 Americans. After you assured us the risk to our health was low and compared it to the common flu. So instead of pivoting like all you Washington politicians do to personal partisan attacks, which are false, why don't you answer the question about how you're going to help schools during this outbreak?
All right. Thank you. Now, Emma, please ask a question to John Ossoff.
Mr. Ossoff, should you win this election, you could become the youngest U.S. senator, and you don't have any experience holding political office. In this pandemic and economic crisis, why should voters trust you to handle this office from day one?
Well, politicians like Senator Perdue have failed us, and the choice is very clear for voters in this election. I run a business that investigates organized crime, political corruption, and war crimes all over the world. We've exposed bribery on multiple continents. And Senator David Perdue sells meetings for corporate PAC checks. He sells lavish retreats on the private island where he lives for corporate PAC money. That's the corruption that's destroying our political system. And it's why politicians don't serve the interests of ordinary people. They serve the interests of our donors. Senator Perdue, even in the midst of this pandemic, is pushing a lawsuit to allow insurance companies to deny health coverage to people with pre-existing conditions like asthma and cancer and diabetes because he works for his donors and not for we the people.
10
I need to
seconds.
respond to that, please. I think I get to respond to that.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Well, I'm glad John Ossoff brought this up. I'd like him to explain where his money comes from really in his business. One of his largest clients is Al Jazeera, the mouthpiece for terrorism. He's actually gotten money for 2 years from the Chinese Communist government and tried to hide it by not disclosing it on a Federal Election Commission report. It's pretty clear he certainly doesn't want to know, people in Georgia to know that he continues to be supported after 2017. And even just 2 weeks ago,
10
he continues
seconds.
to be supported by the Communist Party of the USA.
All right. Thank you
Senator,
very much.
Senator,
Wait.
the Washington Post
I'm not
has
sure
called
he
your
gets a
attacks
second response
to that.
outrageously false. The Associated
Donna, I'm not
Press
sure he
has
gets a
called your
second response
attacks
to that.
flatly false. Well, if
Is
he's
that the
going to
rule?
accuse
Is
me,
that the rule we have? Donna?
moderator, I believe that if he accuses me of those kinds of things, that a rebuttal is appropriate.
We were told you get one rebuttal.
You have 30 seconds to
I've had
rebut it.
that.
Is there
Thank
more you
you.
want to say, Mr. Ossoff?
Thank you. Well, he's just accused me of ridiculous things to avoid answering a question about health care. The Washington Post has called Senator Perdue's attacks outrageously false. The Associated Press has called Senator Perdue's attacks flatly false. My business produces investigations of war crimes, organized crime, and political corruption seen around the world. Pastors in every region of the world, including the Middle East and Asia.
Thank you very
John,
much.
do you deny that you've gotten money from the Chinese government for the last 2 years and did not disclose that? You deny that?
We're going to have to
absolutely
move on,
false.
gentlemen. I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on. And at this point, we're going to go back to Rahul to ask a question to Shane Hazel, please.
Sorry about that. So question for Mr. Hazel. So you and I had a recent conversation about rural broadband. The state of Georgia's broadband deployment initiative has been trying to map the problems with internet access across the state. My listening area, Lake Oconee, Lake Sinclair, 33% of my audience is considered underserved in getting even access to rural broadband. During our conversation, you said state and local levels should be looking at private contracts. Can you go a little bit more into that? Because at the moment, in my listening area, you have a third of my doesn't have access or only has maybe one provider. I mean, for example, should broadband be considered a utility? I just want to go more into what are the solutions for rural broadband for rural Georgia.
Well, it's definitely not a function of the federal government. The federal government has almost zero power to do anything in terms of state in infrastructure. This is really a look at Georgia, and that's not what we should be looking at right now. We've got wars in every nation. We have we're in 120 nations around the world with our military. We have a collapsing economy right now. We're $27 trillion in debt. We have no money for that. We're absolutely broke right now. And we've got an empire of bureaucracy that has absolutely taken the middleman and stuck him in between the taxpayer and the utilities to begin with. You could probably start with less surveillance on the roadways and put that fiber optic to work getting out to those areas if you really wanted to solve something, instead of surveilling innocent men and women traveling on Georgia highways. This is absolutely a state and local issue. This is not a federal issue whatsoever.
Thank you very much. Tom, please ask a question to John Ossoff.
Mr. Ossoff, you said recently that you don't support packing the Supreme Court, but I don't believe that you have said yet whether you would support the constitutional amendment introduced by Senator Perdue that would limit the court to no more than 9 justices. Is that amendment a good idea? Why or why not?
Well, I think judicial reform is a prerogative of Congress. And what I don't support is adding a seat to the Supreme Court because we don't like the policy positions of a justice who's been confirmed. But let's remember that 4 years ago, Senator Perdue was adamant. He gave impassioned floor speeches on the floor of the Senate that no confirmation of a Supreme Court justice should proceed in a presidential election year. Now he's thrown those so-called principles aside, and here's why. The Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on the repeal of the Affordable Care Act and its protections for Georgians with pre-existing conditions just days after this election. And Senator Perdue, working for the insurance industry, wants to rush through a Supreme Court confirmation to repeal the Affordable Care Act and let insurance companies again deny coverage to Georgians with pre-existing conditions like asthma, diabetes, and heart disease.
10 seconds. All right.
I'd like to respond, please.
Yes, absolutely. Senator Perdue, 30
This is another
seconds.
example where John Ossoff will say anything to hide his radical socialist agenda. He will be nothing but a rubber stamp when Chuck Schumer wants to pack that court. Trust me on that. But the situation in 2016 he mentioned is totally different than it is today. We had a different party in the White House than we did in the Senate than we do today. Today we have both parties in the same, in the White House and the Senate of the same party. Even Justice Ginsburg said when
10.
that happens, that of course you should go ahead and confirm.
All right. Thank you very much. Emma, you get the final question in this round, and that is to Senator Perdue.
Senator Perdue, during the Trump administration, you've closely aligned yourself with the president. And according to a recent Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll, 50% of Georgia voters disapprove of the job that the president is doing. You will need some of those voters to win this election. What is your message to them?
Well, first of all, in 6 years, I've traveled all over this state from Hayhire to Hiawassee and listened to people and their troubles and how they're trying to deal with a federal government that's been bloated out of size. Even in the pandemic here, we've reached out to over 1 million Georgians and listened to and tried to help them get through this crisis. What I talk about is this: results. After 8 years of the lowest economic output in U.S. history, we turned this around and have now going on pre-COVID, the greatest economic turnaround in U.S. history, 7.5 million new jobs. We have the highest middle class income ever measured, the lowest unemployment in 50 years, the lowest African-American, Asian, Hispanic unemployment ever measured. And most of all, after 55 years, Emma, of failure in the Democratic Party's great war on poverty from the Great Society, where they did not move the poverty rate at all, in the last 3.5 years, pre-COVID, 6.5 million people pulled themselves out of
10
poverty.
seconds, sir.
That contrast with under the Obama-Biden administration exercise plan, 800,000 people fell into poverty. And that's what they want to go back to. More regulations, more taxes. And that's
Thank
what
you
I'm
very
fighting
much.
against.
Thank you, sir. That concludes the first portion of the debate. The candidates will now ask a question to each of their opponents. Candidates will have 15 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and 30 seconds for a rebuttal. And Shane Hazel, you have the first question to John Ossoff.
Absolutely. John, you've come out in support of Biden and Kamala Harris. Biden was the author of the 94 crime bill that put forth qualified immunity, increased the drug war, police militarization, civil asset forfeiture, no-knock raids. And Kamala Harris, the top cop out of California, has locked more black men in cages than anybody in any other state in history. How is it that you can support these two and then also say you support BLM?
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Hazel. And I learned about public service at the feet of my mentor, Congressman John Lewis, who spent his entire life and his entire career fighting for civil rights and voting rights. And that's why I will be a champion for criminal justice reform in the United States Senate. We have to recognize that racial profiling and brutality, these are not isolated incidents, as Senator Perdue insists. This is a systemic problem in our criminal justice system. It's why we need a new Civil Rights Act. It's why we need national standards for the use of force. It's why we need a new Voting Rights Act to end racial profiling and racism in criminal justice. When a young black man, Ahmaud Arbery, is shot to death in the street in broad daylight here in Georgia, and local police and prosecutors look the other way, that makes a mockery of the 14th Amendment equal protection guarantees of the U.S. Constitution. And that's why
10
we need
seconds.
strengthened civil rights laws. Senator Perdue won't get this done. He didn't even show up when he was invited to address the NAACP about how we can reform this system.
Thank you very much. David Perdue, it is your turn to ask a question to
I'd
Shane
like to
Hazel.
rebut that. I
Sure,
think you get
30
to
seconds for
rebut
a
that,
rebuttal first.
But I thought Shane also got to rebut that for 30 seconds.
Shane, would you like to rebut that?
I don't think Mr. Ossoff answered the question. I think what we have is an expediency move. I think what we're doing is playing party politics once again, when of course, instead of supporting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, there is a presidential nominee out of the Libertarian Party that is actually fighting for the end of qualified immunity, the drug war, police militarization, civil asset forfeiture, and no-knock raids. That is who,
10 seconds.
if we were being honest and consistent, who we would be supporting, John.
All right.
And now
Senator
I would like
Perdue?
to rebut, Donna. Thank you very much. You got a tough job tonight, Donna. You know, John Ossoff, this is what I'm talking about. This is all talk. The 94 law that Shane mentioned, and I agree 100% with him, that law was written by Joe Biden, and it locked up more black men in this country than any law in the last 25 years. What we did in the last 2 years is pass criminal justice reform that freed 3,000 African-American young men who were low-level nonviolent drug
10
offenders
seconds.
who got caught up in minimum sentencing. They had 26 years, the Democrats did, to do something about criminal justice reform, and they did zero.
Thank you very much. Now, Senator Perdue, it is your turn to ask a question to Shane Hazel.
Well, first of all, Shane, I want to thank you for your military service, and I mean that from my heart. We just heard that John Ossoff hypocritically attacked the Paycheck Protection Program. If you had been in the Senate, would you have supported the Paycheck Protection Program?
No, and as libertarians, we don't believe in going outside of the constitutional boundaries. The constitutional boundaries are very strict. They're very specific. And Article 1, Section 8 lays out most of our powers. Our powers are for war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. We are supposed to be an external-looking part of our government without any real influence on the day-to-day lives here in Georgia. And so what I would have done is made sure that our Governor Kemp, understood that he does not have the right to block us from assembly. He does not have the right through force and coercion, through police and sheriffs, to make sure that we are in assembly. I think what we should have done is said, evaluate the risk on your own and go out there and do what you need to do to make your family essentially have food and clothing and leave everybody alone. That's good
10
ideas.
seconds.
We don't think good ideas don't require force. And that is how we protect liberty and our rights here in America. Thank you for the question.
All right. Thank you very much. John Ossoff, please ask your question.
I'm sorry. Hey, Donna, I think I get a rebuttal to
Senator
that
Perdue.
one. Yeah.
All right. Go ahead. 30 seconds.
Well, first of all, Shane, I agree 100% with the concept of limited government. I do think in this situation, though, it was an unprecedented pandemic that required help for people to survive the pandemic. We brought $47 billion to the state of Georgia to try to help our hospitals, our schools, our communities, and our small businesses. We did the PPP program that saved 1.5 million jobs in this state.
10.
Thank you.
I'd like
Thank
to
you very
rebut
much.
that very quickly, if I might.
All right. Go ahead.
Although your heart is in the right place, Senator, the powers are very specific. And if we allow one person to do this, we allow everybody to do this here going forward in precedent. What we should have done is left people to their own lives and their own liberties, and really not shut down the economy, which has cost over 1 million jobs here.
10 seconds. All right. Thank you very much. John Ossoff, please ask your question for Senator Perdue.
Senator, 220,000 parents, grandparents, friends, and neighbors have been killed by a virus that you insisted was no more deadly than the ordinary flu. When you told us the risk was low, you and Donald Trump both downplayed the threat of this crisis. Do you believe that President Trump has done everything in his power to keep the people of Georgia safe and healthy during this pandemic?
Well, John, thank you for the question. I've been totally focused on the needs of Georgians since this crisis broke out. And the quote that you're giving there is totally misleading. So what I'm telling the viewers tonight is you left off the back part of that where we also said that you need to take this very seriously, and we did. We created a relief package that brought $47 billion to the state, including a PPP program that you opposed that saved 1.5 million jobs in Georgia. You would have denied those 1.5 million people their jobs. That's what I'm fighting for. In the meantime, all you would do if you'd been in the Senate would have been a rubber stamp for Chuck Schumer, who is locking the country down. He will not negotiate now for a second phase of this thing that these small businesses really need. These are 140,000 small businesses in the state of Georgia. If they don't get some help in the very near future, all the rest that we've done for them may go for naught. It just seems to me that you're desperate that you'll say anything to hide your radical socialist agenda.
Rebuttal, Mr. Ossoff.
Senator Perdue, look up from your notes and answer the question. Do you believe President Trump has done everything in his power to protect the people of Georgia during this pandemic?
I absolutely do, John. And I'll tell you this, had the Democrats been involved, we'd have anarchy like we have in Portland and Chicago and California. You guys are trying to divide the country right now when we're in a moment of crisis. What we have right now is a way forward. We're doing everything we can to break through the regulations that would bring a vaccine quicker. You guys had all the regulations under Obama and Biden caused us over 2 years to develop these vaccines. In the meantime, we've broken through that and are going to deliver one much earlier than that. And you see these treatment regimens coming. That would have never happened under
Thank you very much.
Controlled Senate.
John Ossoff.
Senator, the President of the United States stood in the White House briefing room and suggested people inject chemical disinfectants. You told us this disease was no more deadly than the flu. You're changing the subject left, right, and center. You seriously believe President Trump has done everything in his power to protect us, or have you been too busy fending off multiple federal investigations for insider trading to do your own job?
Senator Perdue.
I get to respond. First of all, you can talk about that all night, but it's already been refuted. And the other thing, John, is it's so easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. First of all, you misquote me, you misquote the president, and what you said is just not true. This is what I'm saying. You will say anything to divert the people away from the truth about how radical your socialist agenda really is.
Thank you very much. We need to move on. So now it is time for Shane Hazel. Please ask your question of Senator Perdue.
Senator Perdue, the 116th Congress has not fared too well in constitutional voting. Your score to date from the 116th Congress for constitutional votes per the Freedom Index is 25%. What differentiates you from John Ossoff?
Well, first of all, I'm a free enterprise. I believe in the free enterprise system. I believe in economic opportunity for everybody and individual liberty. What John Ossoff believes is pretty obvious. He wants state control. He wants this to be a socialist state. The extreme left of the Democratic Party has taken over control. And if elected, John Ossoff would be a rubber stamp for that radical left movement within the Democratic Party. I believe that this is the greatest country in the history of the world. I love America. The Democrats, including my opponent, John Ossoff, talk negatively about it. At the one hand, they tell people, oh, well, I want to support the police. They walk into another crowd and he says, oh, no, I believe in defunding the police. He is backed by billionaire Michael Bloomberg. And when he goes out in the state, he says, of course, I'm going to support the Second Amendment. But when he's in Atlanta, he says something different, totally. He also talks about never taking any corporate money. He's on TV right now talking about never taking corporate money.
10 seconds.
When it's already been documented by a respected newspaper that he's already taking tens of thousands of dollars. He is radical, and he is trying to hide this radical socialist agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Ossoff.
Debating Senator Perdue, it's like being on cable news. It's like being on Twitter. Senator, come out to the real world where people are suffering. This isn't about Democrats versus Republicans and liberals versus conservatives. This is about the people of the United States against crooks like you in Washington, too busy enriching yourself while you're in office to protect us from the most significant threat to our health and our prosperity in generations, a threat you systematically downplayed and denied and have failed to address responsibly or effectively.
I need to respond to that.
Senator Perdue.
He can say it all night long. It's already been refuted. And the more he says it, the more he confirms exactly what I've been saying. He'll say anything to hide his radical socialist agenda.
All right. Senator Perdue, it is your turn to ask a question to John Ossoff.
I'd be happy to, Donna. Thank you. John, you support defunding the police. Your billionaire buddies who are backing your campaign, 75% of your money is coming from outside the state, want you to defund the police. The Fraternal Order of Police and 95 sheriffs, including 12 sheriffs from your own party in our state, have endorsed me and not you. Why is that?
Senator, I don't support defunding the police, and that's why every time the newspapers report on your allegations, they have to call you false. You're lying about my record because you don't want to address your own. You have done nothing to address the demands of millions of people, a multiracial, multi-generational coalition that is peacefully demanding criminal justice reform and the reform of policing in this country. I was out marching peacefully with the NAACP late spring after Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and Bishop Jackson of the AME Church said that they had invited you to come and address the people and describe how we could heal these wounds and rebuild trust between communities and law enforcement. And not only didn't you show up, you didn't even respond to the invitation, Senator. So instead of trying to politicize this and turn the need for reform of policing and reform of criminal justice into a political wedge, why don't you put forward a proposal that will actually help rebuild trust between communities and law enforcement?
Senator Perdue?
We not only put a proposal, we actually passed a law, John. We actually did something about criminal justice reform, something you could have done for 26 years, your party, and they did not do a thing. Your billionaire buddies want you to defund the police. You've been in rallies where the signs and everything around you are abolish the police. You've said people, you're going to beat them down to where they can't raise their head in public, preaching fear. And so what I'm talking about here is that these sheriffs know you will not have their back. These Fraternal Order of Policemen know that you will not have their back. That's why they're endorsing me.
All right, we're going to move on. John Ossoff, it is your turn for the final question in this segment for Shane Hazel.
Mr. Hazel, grateful to your presence here, grateful for your presence in the race and for your consistent principles. You know, Senator Perdue several years ago expressed that he thought that the Department of Education should be abolished. He's expressed his support for abolishing the Environmental Protection Agency. I don't know if he still holds those views. But what are your thoughts, based in your libertarian principles, on those agencies and the roles that they play in our government and our society?
Well, thank you, John. It's about the first time I've heard you mention my name ever, you or the senator in that case, which I think was an act of suppression. In terms of the Department of Education and the EPA and a whole bunch of the other alphabet soup that isn't constitutionally merited or delegated to the federal government, those powers belong to the states per the 10th Amendment. And what we see now in terms of government education or government indoctrination, I think has led us to the path where we are now. Nobody understands their rights. Nobody is a constitutional expert. Nobody is going out there and defending what the Constitution is. You will probably have something like a 15% constitutional voting record. Senator David Perdue has a 25% in the 116th Congress. There is only one senator in all of the United States that has an A average, and that is Rand Paul. I am a heck of a lot more like Rand Paul than anybody else out there to decentralize these powers to the states and let people reach out and touch their local representatives. That is how we get better results and get the government out. Right now, we have more government than we have ever had in history. We don't need any more of it. We need to
Thank you, Mr. Hazel.
now.
John Ossoff, your rebuttal.
Well, Mr. Hazel, I appreciate your response. I appreciate the consistency of your principles, though I disagree with you on policy. Senator Perdue in the past has expressed his support for abolition of the Department of Education, which runs the Pell Grant program for college affordability. He's expressed his support for abolition of the Environmental Protection Agency, which protects our clean air and clean water. And I doubt that he approaches those issues with the same consistency that you do, Shane.
10 seconds. Thank you very much. Mr. Perdue?
I'd like to respond? Yes.
Yes, you may.
Again, my mom and dad were school teachers, and they believe, and I do too, that the best decision is made between the parents, the school teacher, the administrators of the local community. It just seems to me that you have to look at results. Department of Education, in my mind, has been an unmitigated disaster since it was created in 1976 by Jimmy Carter. Prior to that time, our 14-year-olds led the world in math, science, and reading. And today, we are way down the list. And so it just seems to me we need to hold it accountable, just like we should the post office and other departments up there.
All right. Mr. Ossoff?
So, Senator Perdue, do you still support abolishing the Department of Education?
I didn't mention his name, Donna. I'm sorry.
Do you still support abolishing the Department of Education?
Donna,
will you answer the question?
Right.
His name.
It's a simple
Mr.
question.
Perdue,
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
he doesn't get
Senator
to ask
Perdue,
that question.
go ahead.
I'm done.
All righty.
So no answer.
All right. Then we're going to move on. We're going to move on. And that will conclude our...
You're not listening.
That will conclude our second round. For those just joining us, this is the debate between candidates for U.S. Senate. We will now go on back to the panel to ask questions until we run out of time. I will determine when a rebuttal is appropriate, but candidates may raise their hand if they feel they should get a rebuttal. Rahul Bali, you get the first question in this round.
Senator Perdue, I want to go back to the first round and ask my question on education again. Specifically, should the Trump administration or Congress waive federal requirements for standardized testing and allow states to make those decisions?
Well, personally, Rahul, with everything else we've done in terms of waiving certain requirements of regulatory oversight, I personally would support that until we get out of this crisis. I think the schools are under great pressure. Some are virtual, some are in person, some are combinations, and it puts a lot of pressure on these teachers and school administrators. So that's my answer to the question. I think it's a reasonable thing to consider. I know I'm in disagreement maybe with the secretary, but this one makes sense to me as a child of two teachers.
All right. Thank you very much. Tom Baxter, it is your turn.
Senator Perdue, the constitutional amendment that we were talking about a minute ago with Mr. Ossoff, the one that you co-sponsored, says that the U.S. Supreme Court should consist of no more than 9 members. It says nothing about whether or for how long the court might operate with less than 9 members, and you can affect the balance of the court by reducing its size just as easily as you can by increasing it. Should the amendment have some provision for filling open seats expeditiously to avoid situations like that after the death of Justice Scalia?
Well, I would support that, but I think the primary notion here is that this is, again, obstruction. You see the Democrats in Washington saying now different things than they said in 16. And I just want to make sure this is very clear. The situation now where you have the same party in the White House, the same party in the Senate, is different than we had in 2016, where you had.
But you would agree that the constitutional amendment should include some provision for not dragging out a confirmation?
I think so. And I think what happens here, though, is to follow a historic legacy. And that is that I heard your question is it would require it not to be any less than 9 for some period of time. So my point is this, is that if you look at the historical legacy, 19 times in our history, you've had this situation. In only 17 of those instances, they were confirmed. Even Justice Ginsburg said, in a situation like this, you should, of course, go ahead and confirm in that year.
All right. Thank you very much. Emma Hurt, please ask a question.
And Donna, this question is for all the candidates, hopefully in alphabetical order, Mr. Hazel, Mr. Ossoff, and Senator Perdue. So the question is, on the Georgia coast, sea levels have already gone up by 10 inches in the last 80 years and will continue rising as the ice caps melt and the oceans get warmer. Mr. Ossoff and Senator Perdue, you both have said you oppose the Green New Deal. Mr. Hazel, you are opposed to government funding of renewable energy and greenhouse gas regulations. So what do you propose to do to address sea level rise and climate change?
You leave it to the states. You leave it to the conservationists. You leave it to the guides. You leave it to the outdoorsmen and women that understand their local environments and their habitats. They know more about local populations for fish and wildlife out there than anybody else. Those people can reach out and touch their city council, their county commissioners, their sheriffs, and people like that, and they can come up with better practices for those areas than bureaucrats in DC, especially when we're talking about going into things like the Paris Accords, where we are going to be strapped with more and more debt. We are going to have to live up to regulations while China and India and the rest of the world does not. And first and foremost, you can downsize the government. The government is absolutely the largest polluter in the United States. You scale back the EPA, you scale back the DOD, you scale back a whole bunch of the alphabet soup, and now you've got a cleaner world almost automatically.
Thank you. Mr. Ossoff?
Well, Georgia's farmers and fishermen are already feeling the effects of climate change, as are our coastal communities, which will continue to see more high storm surge events, more high wind events. We can unite this country right now at a moment when so many are out of work and struggling economically, behind a historic infrastructure plan with unprecedented investments in clean energy to make Georgia the leading producer of renewable energy in the American Southeast, to invest in public health clinics, research and development, rural broadband, transit and transportation. We can unite people behind an infrastructure program. Senator Perdue's been in the Senate for 6 years, in the Senate majority. No major infrastructure plan, because this is a man without vision. This is a man who lacks vision beyond the interests of his donors. Senator, you don't even accept the scientific consensus that greenhouse gas pollution is driving climate change, do you?
Yeah. Rebuttal, Senator Perdue.
Thank you. Let's talk about infrastructure. Democrats for 20 years tried to deepen this port, some Republicans as well, but career politicians failed to deepen the Port of Savannah over 20 years. As a business guy, I went to Washington to get results for the people of Georgia, and we did that. That's the highest economic return of any infrastructure investment that we had available to us in the United States, and we got it done. It'll be completed by the end of next year. The next thing is I grew up on a farm, and I can tell you that nobody understands better than farmers do about how to take care of air, land, and the water. It's not big bureaucracy that's going to solve this. And you can talk about infrastructure all you want to. Talk to us about how we're going to finance that, because none of what you've done as Democrats have ever worked.
So, Senator Perdue, you may now answer the question that Emma asked about climate change.
Well, first of all, Emma, thank you for the question. I think we can all agree the climate is changing. And as I said, I grew up on a farm, working on a farm, and you know, my ancestors and my relatives all know, because they want to hand it down to the next generation. Listen, what we've got to do is different from what the Democrats are talking about. They're talking about the Green New Deal. And no matter what John Ossoff says, in one crowd he says, oh, no, I don't support it. Another one he does. He wants to do away with all oil and gas production as soon as possible. He talks about renewals, but he never talks about base load. You have to have a base load. And right now we don't have that in terms of power generation. They would cost millions of jobs. The Green New Deal costs $9 trillion per year. That is the greatest threat to Medicare and Social Security that we have in America today, is this outrageous spending plan the Democrats are trying to perpetrate in this election.
Thank you very much. Rahul, it's your turn to ask a question.
And I actually want to follow up on this conversation. Mr. Ossoff, when you and I talked about your infrastructure plan, I asked you, how are you going to pay for it? And your answer was the United States Treasury. I'm looking for specifics. Is that going to be through raising taxes, raising fees like on cell phones for rural broadband, specific cuts to the federal budget, or taking on more debt for more national debt. I'm just looking for how you're going to pay for that plan.
Well, first of all, we should be cutting taxes for working families and small businesses. We should be cutting taxes for working families and small businesses. And as for how we finance an ambitious infrastructure agenda, look, when it comes time to embark upon wars of choice based often on false pretenses, when it comes time to shovel trillions of dollars at investment banks on Wall Street to bail them out, when Senator Perdue and Mitch McConnell want to spend trillions of dollars on giveaways for their political donors, Senator Perdue never asked where we're going to find those resources. It's when it comes time to invest in our infrastructure that Senator Perdue suddenly pleads that the country is bankrupt. Remember that Senator Perdue went into the Senate 6 years ago saying that getting the federal debt under control was his top priority, even before COVID. $5 trillion of growth in the federal
10
debt.
seconds.
But it hasn't gone to investments in infrastructure. It hasn't gone to investments in small businesses and working people. A huge amount of it has gone to giveaways to Senator Perdue's donors who pay him for lavish
Thank you very
retreats
much.
on his private island.
Rebuttal, Senator Perdue.
Yes, I get to rebut that. Thank you. Well, first of all, he still hasn't answered the question how he's going to pay for it. And for him to tell the people of Georgia that he believes in cutting taxes is a joke. No Democrat has ever said that. And I'm telling you that right now, Joe Biden is going to drive taxes up. If you don't believe it, listen to what he just said last week. And John Ossoff will be a rubber stamp for that policy. Look, I believe in public-private partnerships. We've already proven that around the world. That can absolutely build infrastructure. But this idea,
10 seconds.
just like under President Obama, where he went forward with a great $1 trillion infrastructure package that gave us no economic return. They don't understand.
All right.
It's for John Ossoff to talk about creating jobs is a joke.
Thank you very
He's not
much.
created one American job.
Thank you very much, Senator. Rebuttal, John Ossoff.
Well, while we're on the subject of infrastructure and climate change, Senator, just like you haven't answered the question whether you still support abolishing the Department of Education, and we know you're not going to answer the question because you're afraid to answer the question. You haven't answered the question whether you accept the scientific consensus that human greenhouse gas pollution is driving climate change.
I need to rebut that, please. Thank you.
Yes, quickly.
We're
We're going to move
talking
on.
about unanswered. While we're talking about unanswered questions, you've never come clean on Al Jazeera or the Chinese Communist government, even though people have talked about that. You still say you don't take corporate money, even though there's a documented press article about that. So when you start talking about economic matters and creating jobs, it's really an irony since you've never created one American job.
This is the swamp, folks. This is the swamp. He won't answer the question, always deflecting, always pivoting. Do you support abolishing the Department of Education? Do you accept the scientific consensus on climate change? Senator, don't refer to your notes, look into the camera and tell us.
The question is, did he take corporate money? He has not answered that. John, will you answer that to the people of Georgia right now?
My campaign has
you can
not
talk about the
accepted a
swamp.
We're gonna
single
have to move on,
contribution from a corporate
Gentlemen,
PAC.
we're gonna
Senator,
have to
you're
move on.
refusing to answer very direct questions.
We're going to have to move on. Tom Baxter, you have a question.
This is a question I'd like to ask all three candidates, and this time let's start with Mr. Ossoff, and then go to Senator Perdue, and then to Mr. Hazel. Many of those who have warned that a global pandemic was coming now believe that this won't be the last one. What can this country do to ensure that our reaction to the next pandemic, if it comes, won't become politicized and uncoordinated? And please try to answer without too much casting blame or taking credit for the current pandemic.
Who's that for first, Tom? Is that for me?
That's for you.
Yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Ossoff first.
Sure. Look, my wife, Alicia, is an OBGYN doctor here in Atlanta, and she and all of the heroic healthcare workers have put themselves at risk to keep people healthy during this crisis. She has held the hands of mothers with COVID-19 delivering babies who cannot be surrounded by loved ones. The healthcare workers have done their jobs. It's politicians like Senator Perdue who have not, and everybody knows it. The answer to your question, Tom, is to empower and trust medical experts. Senator Perdue, who voted to cut $1 billion from Georgia's own Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who compared COVID-19 to the flu, who enabled this president in a pandemic response that everybody from all parties known has been a disaster. Nearly 250,000 Americans have died. We need government that is honest and competent and that empowers public health experts in a public health emergency.
10 seconds. All right, Senator Perdue.
Thank you. It just seems to me that, again, idle chatter here. You know, what we really did is we brought help to the people of Georgia, both in the hospitals, schools, communities, and in the workplace. While John Ossoff opposed the PPP, his own father took out a PPP loan. It saved 1.5 million jobs in Georgia. But he won't answer that honestly to the people of Georgia, why he opposed the PPP loan. What we've got to do now is build up our strategic reserves, develop a quicker way to develop vaccines. And by the way, we had to knock out a lot of democratically originated regulations in order to begin to do that. There's no way that we're going to be able to stand up to the next virus, however, if we don't get our financial house in order. As Shane just said, we dumped a couple of $1 trillion, $2.9 trillion on this in the CARES package. We may not have the right to do that later.
Rebuttal, John Ossoff.
Senator, I'm astounded. It is not idle chatter, Senator. It's 220,000 Americans killed by a virus.
No, but your
that
solution
you told us
is
was, excuse me, Senator.
Chatter.
Excuse me,
Idle
Senator.
Chatter. Your solution,
220,000.
Not one
Donna,
solution.
I'll wait for my time to be restored. Are you done, Senator?
No, not by a long shot. I'd like you to answer the question.
220,000 Americans have been killed. And listen to you, schoolyard insults, not a shred of empathy, not a shred of personal responsibility. That a virus you told us posed low risk to our health, that a virus you compared to the ordinary flu, that administration response that was obviously totally incompetent, which you enabled and praised, has compounded the human tragedy and the economic damage. You should be ashamed of yourself, sir.
No,
and
who should be ashamed of yourself, John, is that you took money from the Chinese government that originated this virus in the first place.
Senator Perdue,
you're so critical of
gentlemen, we're going to have to give
government for their culpability.
That's
we're going to have to give
folks.
Shane Hazel a chance to answer this question. Shane?
Thank you very much. Ladies and gents, if you're sick of this kind of stuff and you want principled consistency on the policy here in the United States and overseas, you're not going to get it with these type of politicians. Both have spent about $40 million in terms of getting their voices out to you. Ladies and gents, this is about you. This is about the American people. This is about freedom and liberty. This is not about a one-size-fits-all government solution. This is about empowering you. And as a Marine combat vet who went through nuclear, biological, chemical training, I can tell you to see politicians making gross accusations, flip-flopping day in and day out about what is going on in the current political environment is absolutely gross and neglectful of the American people and their lives.
10 seconds.
The less government we have in your life, the better decisions that you can make without force and coercion.
We're going to move on. And now, Emma Hurt, your question.
Senator Perdue, Mr. Ossoff has criticized you for not holding an open public town hall while in office. I understand you hold constituent conference calls multiple times per week. I'm asking specifically about the open town hall format. Why haven't you held any?
Well, first of all, Emma, that's not quite true. That's a lie that the Democrats have perpetrated for 6 years because they only want to create something they can come in and disrupt. So what we've done is we've taken care of the people who have legitimate questions. We've been meeting them. I've talked to everybody, or people from all 159 counties. And just in this pandemic, we've reached out to over 1 million people and helped them, tried to reach out and help them through this. John talks about empathy. I've lost some very close friends in this. It's outrageous to say that this is not personal to me. But what we've got to do now is move forward. We got to beat this virus. We got to get ready for the next one, and we got to get our economy back. Who do you trust more to get the economy back? Somebody that's actually created tens of thousands of jobs, or somebody that just talks this idle chatter about the Democratic mantra?
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to go now to Rahul. Your question.
Senator Perdue, I wanted to talk about something else that we talked about in a recent conversation, and that is the focus on mandatory federal expenses like Social Security, Medicare. I want to focus on Social Security. I'm looking for specifics. Would you raise the Social Security tax coming out of paychecks? Would you raise the age someone gets full Social Security benefits? Again, I'm looking for specifics on how you said this is going to be something you want to focus on in a second term. What would you do specifically with Social Security?
Well, first of all, I would absolutely protect Social Security and Medicare beneficiaries. But I'll tell you the greatest threat to them, and I'll get to the answer in a minute. I have not said anything about John Ossoff yet because he can put his finger down. But I'll tell you the greatest threat to it is all the Democratic spending that they want to do puts Medicare and Social Security in great jeopardy. Right now, I believe that you can solve Social Security by working on several different things, but you've got to protect the beneficiaries and make sure that nothing happens to that. You got to grow the economy. You got to keep career politicians from raiding the trust fund. And in the meantime, what they want to do is basically just more talk, more entitlement. And so there's no real solution coming out. The Democratic spending that they're talking about between socialized medicine and Green New Deal would definitely it would jeopardize Medicare beneficiaries and Social Security beneficiaries.
But where would your focus be? In getting more money into Social Security or curtailing the benefits? I'm asking specifically, where's your focus going to be on that? Because that's something you said you want to work on.
As a business guy, you work on revenue and expenses, and you see a situation like this. Career politicians have buried their heads since 1983 on this, both Democrats and Republicans. It's time to get serious about this. And I believe in a second term of a President Trump, I believe we can get to that. But I think you have to have compromise in here. I believe that you have to work on means testing potentially. I think you have to work on the revenue side of this thing. But the first thing you've got to make sure of is you protect the beneficiaries, to protect and save Social Security and Medicare.
All right, gentlemen, that is all the time we have for questions. Each candidate will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Senator Perdue, you get the first closing statement.
Well, thank you, Donna. I think the viewers can see tonight that what I was saying is exactly right. John Ossoff is desperate. He'll say anything to hide his radical socialist agenda. He wants the Green New Deal. He wants to defund the police. He wants to close military bases in Georgia. He wants to force socialized medicine on us. In my 40-year business career, I learned how to create tens of thousands of jobs, and I took that to Washington to make a difference and get results for Georgia. We created the greatest economic turnaround in U.S. history after 8 years of total disaster under Barack Obama and Joe Biden. We are building our military back. We're confirming judges that will apply law, not make law. We have now achieved energy independence. And so right now, I think the choice is very clear. It just seems to me that if we stand together, we can solve and beat this
10
debt
seconds.
crisis. We can absolutely get our economy back. And we can ensure the American dream is a reality for every child in America going forward. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you. John Ossoff, it is your turn.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you to our hosts. My mother came to this country as an immigrant when she was 23 years old because she believed in America. That doesn't mean she indulged some fantasy about our history or that she didn't know how much further we had to go, but she believed and admired in e pluribus unum, out of many one. She admired that our founding documents enshrined the principles of universal human rights. And she became a citizen because she knew that our democracy is how we move this country forward. But what's happened in these last 4 years has broken my mother's heart, like it's broken so many hearts. We are more divided than at any time in modern American history. We have a president who is obviously not up to the job and who works every day to divide us further. 250,000 Americans will soon have died from a virus that our own government, President Trump and Senator Perdue, lied to us and told us posed low risk to our health. Our health care is on the line. This is a matter of life and death. It's time to vote and make a change in this country.
Thank you. Shane Hazel, you get the final closing statement.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for having me, paying attention and being involved in this process. If you're tired of what you're seeing here between politicians, you've got a choice. And with Georgia voting laws, with 50+1, you get a do-over if there's a runoff. My mission is to bring the people together while preserving the freedom of every individual, regardless of skin color, age, faith, gender, love, and every other nuance which makes us unique. We come together and we remove the government corporate cabals from our lives of peaceful people here in the U.S. and around the world. I believe in peace through liberty. I believe it is time to end the wars, including the drug war. I believe it is time to restore sound money and end the Federal Reserve. And I believe it is time to end the empire, which is the bureaucratic nightmare which we all face in our daily lives from the time we get out of our federally approved mattress to the time we get back into it at the very end of the day. I'm Shane Hazel, and I hope to earn your vote.
Thank you. That concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd. Don't forget to turn in your absentee ballot if you requested one. And early voting in person began today and will run through October 30th. Thanks to the candidates and thanks to the members of our panel for participating. Rahul Bali, Emma Hurt, and Tom Baxter. I would also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club and Georgia Public Broadcasting for arranging today's debate. For more information on the full schedule of debates, please visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be available for viewers to watch on demand on Atlanta Press Club's Facebook page and on Georgia Public Broadcasting's website, gpb.org. I'm Donna Lowry. Thank you for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series.